Welcome to our Strategic Planning Guide. This guide and the resources in our LibGuide will help you with assignments 1 and 2. But beyond this course, I'm hoping that you'll see that for school librarians, inquiry should be a professional way of life. I'd like you to consider that the evidence that you gather to create a needs assessment and the evidence that you gather in assessing your progress towards your goals in your action plan are all part of a big inquiry project. It is about evidence and it's about strategic planning and practice. A good question to ask is why plan? Planning is a way we can control the direction of our school library program. Planning is a process having to do with determining where you want to go, where you are now, and ways to get from here to there. You don't want your program to be going down the path to failure as depicted on this slide, but rather by effective planning, you can make decisions about key components of your practice. Planning helps you articulate your vision through goals and objectives. Planning is a process that can be shared and communicated so that you're not doing it alone. It gives colleagues a chance to have a sense of ownership in your enterprise. It fosters communication and helps to build networks of people and ideas. In creating a library strategic plan, you need to remember that it doesn't exist in isolation. You need to engage your community to discover what your community's needs are and how your library can make a difference, can make an impact in serving and improving this community. Note, it's pretty easy if you're coming out of our program. I trust that you're going to be an excellent librarian. I felt I was an excellent librarian, and I patted myself on the back because the things I did seemed to make my community happy. But I wasn't always seeking the problems that needed to be solved in the community. And I often closed my doors. I had the teachers I collaborated with, but I didn't look for the signals outside as I might have. And so what I started doing was informally setting goals each year. I put them in my annual report, and with each subsequent report, I would report on my whether or not I'd addressed the goals. I would reflect. Once I started doing that, I realized I was growing my program. I was making a difference in a much larger way, and I got out of the ruts that I found myself in. I think it's really important that we dig ourselves out of those ruts and not just be complacent about our practice. And for that reason, I think that the strategic planning and the evaluation of our approach to the goals that we set is really important, and also important to measure and report on, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. This is a model for strategic planning that gives you the big picture. As you can see, it's cyclical. To prepare, you need to identify where we are now, and then determine what are your values, behaviors, philosophy. Looking at school culture, organizational structures, and management styles all play into these very important questions. It's an iterative, cyclical process. An opportunity to set a baseline for future growth. This is a slide that shows what your process will look like for this particular class. Red is what you'll do during assignment 1. Green is what you'll do during assignment 2, and the blue is what you would do if you were in a permanent job to complete the cycle. For this course, you will not be doing part C of the cycle, which is indicated in blue, but I wanted to give you a sense of the whole process. Strategic planning is a tool of evidence-based practice. It helps us gather data to determine where we are, which is called the strategic plan. The action plan articulates where we want to go. It's comprised of the vision and the mission statement, goals and objectives, and how we're going to get there. Needs assessment determines the current status of the school library you're studying. As a result of the needs assessment, You will develop vision and mission statements for the library and a long-range plan containing goals and objectives for 3 years. The action plan will make recommendations based on what you've learned for actions to be taken over a 3-year period with timeframes and measures to determine progress. In real life, you'd form an advisory committee of stakeholders from school and local community as part of your planning process. To begin, we have to understand the context of the school library. What is the community and the school in which it is situated like? What is their culture and history? What are the characteristics in terms of demographics and size? What types of organization or management do they use? What is the work culture like? What are the missions, goals, and objectives of the communities and schools? What are their values? How do they organize work? How do the managers manage? How do they think of and treat the workers? How do the workers perceive the managers? What do we need to know about this community, school, and library to make decisions about organizing its work? As with any journey, you'll need to plan for your adventure. What will you need? What route will you take? What problems might you encounter? How can you plan to deal with them? You will also need to work with a library media coordinator, if there is one, the district library media specialist, again, if there is one, the assistant principal or principal, the curriculum coordinator, or the administrator to whom the librarian reports. You may need to interview, get documents. It's important to identify the people that you're going to be working with early. Please also consider me as an advisor. I'm happy to help you through the process, and I'm happy to be a resource for you. For this course, also, you do not have the luxury of choosing a favorable time frame. You can choose your library, however, and that will be the context of your strategic planning. Choosing to do your strategic planning for the library in which you are doing your field study makes the most sense. But if for some reason that's not going to work out for you, please let me know and I'll make other arrangements. Some of you are lucky enough to already be in a professional library position. For those of you who are working at a new library, writing this strategic plan could be a really exciting opportunity for you to engage in planning for your new space. But before that, to really do a community scan, which is something we don't always take the time to do. And so I encourage you, if you are in your own spot, to make this meaningful, to really write a thoughtful plan that will serve you for the next 3 years, even though you'll be able to edit it as you go along. Creating an initial plan can be a really important way for you to go in directions you may not have even imagined you might go in. Really important directions that make a serious impact on your community. In the real world, when beginning a strategic plan, timing and culture are both important. There are times when a school or a district is under unusual stress, and their major priority is going to overshadow your strategic efforts at program improvement. You may get into a situation that the library staff is dysfunctional, or that there are personnel problems, or that there's been a negative view of the library by faculty. Team building and changing misconceptions, building trust, those might be your first orders of business. Remember, sometimes the neediest libraries are the most rewarding to work with as long as you have a strong vision and you think that there are goals that are achievable. It's important to make a commitment, and there is background you need to build for yourself to help inspire a commitment to what good can look like. ASL provides a wealth of materials to inform and inspire your commitment to good programs. Also, if you have the opportunity to travel to other schools that have great reputations with good programs and interview the librarians, that can give you a completely new perspective. You can begin informing yourself by visiting school districts and school library websites to look at their mission statements. And you can follow librarians blogging and Instagramming and podcasting and generally sharing what they've done that's innovative in their own practice. Let's get started. Let's figure out what we need to begin planning. This is just like any other adventure. You need to think about what you'll need, what route you'll take, any problems you'll encounter, and how you'll deal with them. Happily, there's many resources for us to work with. I've gathered many of them on the school library headquarters LibGuide, and if you look at the strategic planning tab, you'll see a number of embedded playlists on strategic planning, environmental scanning, and evidence-based practice, as well as a wonderful guide from the state of Massachusetts that we'll look at in a minute. In addition, our school library standards book contain at least 2 or 3 chapters that are really going to guide your planning. Chapter 13, Measuring School Librarian Growth. Chapter 12, Measuring Learner Growth, will not only give you ideas for what to look for, but also give you some strategies for measurement and metrics. Let's take a closer look at Assignment 1, the environmental scan of the community and the school. In the scan, we're going to be looking for cultural context and implications for our library media programs, and these are going to be revealed in such things as the demographics we discovered, the mission statements, vision statements, goals, portraits of a graduate, the current educational program as we see in curricular documents, things that we observe, for instance, the methods of instructions, the special programs that schools provide for students, for instance, service learning, especially at the high school, problem-based learning. Do they engage in inquiry-based learning? The methods of assessing student learning and reporting their progress, programs for special groups, and some big picture data, national and state data. In fact, also how current issues that you see in the news impact your school. This is what you're going to be collecting to be able to scan your community for Assignment 1. You can see that we have some descriptions relating to data, collecting things like the vision and mission statement. In Assignment 2, we might do some suggestions for editing. We're going to be looking for assessment data, what the various programs look like across the discipline, some of the things we mentioned in the last slide. You'll also be on the lookout for those red flags, the issues that you see as you have conversations. Observe the way your colleagues behave, the way they talk to each other and about each other. Student behavior, what do the hallways look like? Are the schools decorated? Is there a sense of pride? Do people know the mission and vision statements? You're also looking specifically in the library. How many students are there? Is it used solely for study hall? Is there a professional certified media specialist there? Has there been there one before? I'm assuming you're going to be working with one in your field experience, but what is the history of the library in that school? Does the program seem unrecognized, unconnected, existent or non-existent? How long has your librarian or media specialist been there? And during that period, has there been program growth? How much time is devoted in the library to teaching and learning? And are you seeing overall good or less than good vibes? Some of this is a little on the affective side, but I want you to observe and think with your heart as well as your head. Those red flags that you might discover are really important, and I think that even if we were in our own program, as some of you are, I don't want you to think as things that are not great as a bad thing, because really what you're looking at is a baseline. These are indicators of where you're starting and how you are going to move towards growth. And so as you establish these baselines in various different areas of the program, don't forget to document them. Before a renovation, for instance, somebody's got to take pictures of what the place looked like before. So measure, take pictures or videos, gather both quantitative and qualitative data of what things look like now, what currently exists. These metrics will be critical later as you try to document growth. There are so many ways to collect data. You'll find a lot of primary source materials on the library website, perhaps in the office and in notebooks. You'll also be looking online at the website, what the vibe, as well as the actual content is of the website, the social media presence that you observe. Your formal and informal interviews as you move around the school, any survey data that may have been collected. Keep in mind survey data that might need to be collected for your upcoming plan. Your informal and formal observations of the culture as well as classroom learning. I'm hoping that you'll be visiting classrooms and seeing teachers' styles and seeing the general way students are teaching and students are learning and teachers are teaching. The chatter that you may get involved in the cafeteria or in the hallways or in the library workroom. And things like the portrait of a graduate, which many schools now include on their website. In terms of more quantitative data, this is a list of some of the areas in which you can get local data about your community and sometimes about your school district. In assignment 1 and in assignment 2, we'll be thinking about Peter Drucker and Mark Fields, these business consultants, quote, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." We are going to, sorry about the Microsoft image generator spelling, but what we'll look at is before we even develop strategy, we really understand how these particular strategies are going to live within a school culture. And so that's one of the reasons we are doing our scan. But I wanted to just share with you that assignment 1 is very detailed. You'll have a lot of guidelines, and you'll know exactly what you need to collect and think about. As we move on to assignment 2, we'll be also thinking about culture, and we'll be developing a needs assessment and an action plan relating to our observations, the data we collected, and the culture we're observing. We'll be talking a lot about why we're planning. I am going to point you to the Massachusetts Library System, excellent documents on strategic plannings for libraries. These are included on our LibGuide, and you'll see the arrow on the right that shows you exactly where they are right now. What is a strategic plan? Why does a library need a strategic plan? And the parts of the strategic plan are things that you may want to look at early on. Why are we doing a needs assessment? Based on our scan in assignment 1, we're going to move forward. We're going to identify the areas for growth. We're going to look at the problems we identified and try to start solving these problems through the library lens, through our ability to make change. We're going to conceptualize formal goals and set priorities, establish ways to measure our progress within a time frame. We're going to inspire improvement in our building. This is one area in which a librarian can start actual change and lead in their buildings. And we're going to be building on that baseline I mentioned earlier for the second cycle of planning. This is an image of what assignment 2 looks like. You'll notice that it has 2 parts. The needs assessment, and that is partly the strategic plan or the action plan. And then the second part of this, which we'll be due the week after the needs assessment is due and the plan is due, will be how are you going to share this with others? And so we are going to imagine and perhaps prepare you for in real life a board presentation sharing you as a professional and your interest in school improvement in front of a board meeting. You'll need to get familiar with the concept of SMART goals and objective writing, the elements of design thinking, the personas you'll be addressing in terms of needs. All of these resources will be available on the LibGuide, on our playlist, and it'll all be embedded in Canvas. And I especially, as you build goals, and we'll look at examples of this in a little bit, I want those goals to not just be library-centered or not just be you-centered. I need these to be based on your personas and learner or human-centered. You need to include rationales, although they will be brief, with the goals that you write. And I'll show you examples. A while back in the very end of 2019, after going to AASL, I met with a couple of people who are at Lee or Lewis High School, talking about their real life journey through strategic planning. This blog post and the video that I'm going to point to in the next slide really makes it alive for you and shows you how planning actually can move a program forward. In this case, it allowed them to win an award. So because I wrote this at the end of December, I framed it like this. It's about making resolutions, measuring your progress toward keeping them. In practice, I regret that I didn't create formal plans, although I did write at least 3 goals each year and I reported on my progress. These goals moved my program forward and moved me beyond simply making short-sighted hunches or acting on short-sighted hunches and believing that I did a good enough job every day. And so I noted that goals pushed me to address the needs of a growing immigrant population in our community by gathering critical resources and developing targeted learning experiences and activities for our ESL students. Goals pushed me to discover the needs of my administrators and solve their problems by developing LibGuides that connected them to the resources they needed for educational research and for examining effective practice and innovative strategies. These are specific needs that could be easily addressed through the library and it would improve major segments of our community. In fact, addressing your administrator's needs really has an impact on the entire school. This is the video that I mentioned by Mimi Marquet and Lisa Koch. I hope you'll get a chance to look at this. And this is an example of a strategic plan that they wrote. One of the things I want you to note specifically in that strategic plan is the connection of the mission and vision statements that they created using a commitment statement. And this is the example. By focusing on guided inquiry design and library standards through the lens of equity, librarians will facilitate student-driven learning experiences that support school goals and result in portrait of a learner outcomes for students. What I want you to note here in this quote is that the yellow highlights are library focused and the blue highlights connect the library to the larger school goals and its commitment plan. We are not acting in isolation. When we move our program forward, we move it forward in connection with the goals of the school and sometimes the district. And we want people to know that we're doing that. We're not in it for the library. We're not in it for the librarian. We're in it to achieve school and district goals. Future Ready Schools, especially the Future Ready Librarians framework, is wonderful to examine, but specifically in this case, I want to point to this document called Let's Talk. It was developed during the pandemic. So much of this is pretty much permanently useful. There's a number of pieces here that will help in terms of planning. I mentioned your school administrator earlier. One of the things they suggest here is connecting with your school administrator as you begin a planning process. To identify their key interests. In this case, they're sharing a sample email. How may I help? As a teacher and librarian, I can lead, teach, and support efforts to help students and teachers be successful in these uncertain times. I've done some preliminary work to identify potential areas to support teachers, etc. I think that this type of connection, whether it's an email or in a personal conversation, whether it's scheduled through the school administrator or just a meeting in the hall, can be really important. I had a series of principals myself, and from time to time I'd pop in and just say, hey, what is keeping you up at night, and in what ways can the library help you? And these things, these informal conversations were really powerful in opening the door to future conversations. Sometimes an administrator would share immediately what's concerning them. Sometimes it had to do with issues relating to safety. We dealt with issues relating to plagiarism. We dealt with issues relating to the effectiveness of instruction and the effectiveness of assessments. And we worked together to plan solutions that were school-wide, where we worked in teams. In fact, we were able to dedicate faculty meetings for what was called the tuning protocol to see if we could improve the authentic assessments that teachers assigned and to discuss student work at a faculty meeting. These were really initiated by a simple email or a simple conversation. So I want you to know that these types of needs are possible to discover and address. So your action plan allows you to identify goals, objectives, action steps, and metrics. Those are the big parts. And to professionally engage and engagingly present your action plan in a report to your administrator as well as the Board of Ed. In terms of that presentation component, we'll take a closer look at that. Your assignment is to highlight the major points of your plan, not all of them. And the challenge actually is to show the board what you as a professional look like. It may be that they've never seen a librarian before, but you come in confident based on the professional discoveries you've made with a serious plan. They're going to look at you in a different way. You want to be strategic about what you're going to share with your school board. Maybe you don't want to share a goal that relates to weeding. You can certainly justify it, but there might be some goals that might be more engaging for your school board. These are things that you want to think about strategically, and we'll be discussing them. So what does a needs assessment and action plan look like? You will find so many examples of them on the web, and more specifically, you'll find examples of them in our LibGuide and in the descriptions that we have in Canvas, and I'm hoping that you'll find some and discover them and share them with each other. These are the areas of interest. We'll be covering the areas that have to do with the school library program, and these are potential areas for your 3 goals. You don't need to cover all of them, but they are areas that you might address. You'll also connect your plan to personas. There's not a specific section, but I'm hoping that your goals will connect to the individuals they are meant to support. And so you'll be thinking about persona development. There are resources for that as well on the LibGuide. And you may remember personas from the AASL standards. In fact, I was one of the key figures who wrote the personas. And so you may want to look at this persona profiles and think specifically about the people with whom you work and the people you serve. So Tony, the teacher, Leon, the lead learner, Patty, the parent, and Patty's children, although they're not identified in the national standards, certainly identifying kids as your personas to address is an excellent idea. So the idea on writing personas and thinking about them is to allow you to focus a lens on which learners and other learning community members might you focus during the course of this plan. What specific impacts and interventions you may make and on which groups. In your case, you're going to choose at least 2 personas and try to weave these through your plan. In fact, you might weave their stories through your board presentation as well and create a storytelling element in your presentation. I mentioned the Massachusetts library system. This page describes the parts of the plan and defines what they are. To disambiguate a couple of the terms I mentioned, a vision statement as opposed to a mission statement. Vision defines the optimal desired future state, the mental picture of what an organization wants to achieve over time. It provides guidance and inspiration as to what an organization is focused on achieving in a period of time. I think the thing to remember about the vision statement is that it functions as your North Star to what we're working to every day and trying to accomplish in the long term. It's written succinctly and in an inspirational manner that makes it easy for everybody to repeat. In fact, in some schools, you will be able to have people repeat the vision statement or even the mission statement because the administrators value it so much. On the other hand, a mission statement defines the present state or purpose of an organization and often answers three questions about why the organization exists: what it does, who it does it for, and how it does what it does. It is also succinctly written in the form of a sentence or two. And it's something that, again, all employees or all members of the community are able to articulate. Here's another example of a mission and the difference between mission and vision statements. But what Chris Drew also adds is the notion of a value statement. And that's the declaration that communicates the organization's or individual's core beliefs and guiding principles. These are principles that you can find easily in the common beliefs of AASL, but you may be able to create value statements that connect with value statements of your school. And you may want to include them as well if they're valued as value statements. These would be handy to have in your school board presentation, and also not just handy, but show you as somebody who is really living the values that the district or the school have identified. New York City School Library System also has a document on strategic planning. In fact, it's a LibGuide, and I point you to their guidelines in terms of their definitions of mission, visions, and goals. I also want to point you to the Canadian School Libraries Research Toolkit. If you are a Schoen Fellow, you probably have already seen this. I use this to help people engage in action research. In some regards, what we're doing here is a bit of action research. We're doing research to solve school problems, and we are using data. We're collecting data as a result, and we are putting the data that we collect and the observations as well into action. And these are kind of action research is research that is done in practice. And what this particular part of the Canadian School Librarians Association document suggests is what types of outcomes and impacts we're looking for. So as you write the action plan, you're going to have metrics. And as I'll mention later, you can mention just check this off and show us that it's done. But really what we want are measures that measure change. In fact, the outcome measures is what they suggest here. They measure change from the perspective of the student, the teacher, or the other library customer, or the stakeholder. For instance, they say the outcome for students who participate in an information literacy lesson might be increased capacity to make decisions about the information they use. And how will you measure that? But developing measures like that is important because it tells the story of change. SMART goals are used in a number of associations, and this is a model that is very commonplace. The goals are specific: who, what, where, and why. You can measure them with qualitative or quantitative data. They're challenging but doable given the existing restraints. That's achievable. They're relevant. They're connected to objectives or standards, easy to do in a school environment. They're timed. You have determined dates for assessing progress and completion. In this case, I would like all of your goals to also be human-centered. This is not unusual, but not explicit in a number of business goals that you'll see out there. I want to see directly how they're connected to meeting the needs of personas. And I'll show you examples of what that will look like shortly. You'll notice that in the National Standards book, there is a similar document that describes what goals look like, SMART goals look like in terms of a school or a school library. And you'll see examples on page 166 of the building of a SMART goal. The goal is where we want to be. The objectives and the actions that you write under them are the specific steps that we need to get there. The measurable objectives that are usually in the right column are the specific measures we use to determine whether or not we're successful in achieving the goal. Before you adopt an objective, consider whether or not you'll be able to collect data that indicate whether you have or have not attained the objective. But I also want you to think about connecting metrics that go beyond doneness to examine impact on humans. As I mentioned earlier, the National School Library Standards are excellent for helping you determine goals. In this case, Chapter 14 is a checklist. It's also a downloadable PDF on the Standards website. These are really wonderful ways for you to identify goals. You're not going to use these word for word, but you're going to identify what possible goals are in the various areas of the domains, the shared foundations, and on the building and district level. It is important to try to connect your goals to our shared foundations or common beliefs, and I encourage you to do that. I also encourage you to look at other models that are geared to the school library world. This document is by the Future Ready Schools Foundation that I mentioned earlier, and it's a specific guide to strategic planning at your library. And these are some of the templates that you could use if you decide to go with the Future Ready model. In this case, we're looking at if you know the Future Ready model, you'll know that there are gears, and one of them is equitable digital access, another one is instructional partnerships, and these would be certainly fine for you framing your plan around. Not too long ago, the Future Ready Schools conducted a webinar on planning for excellence in your school library program. I encourage you to take a look at that, and this is doing your plan using the Future Ready framework as a model. Your plan should not be developed in isolation. You should involve students when you can in the process. As I mentioned, involving your administrator is a great idea. Collaborating with your colleagues, your teachers, to integrate library enhancements into the curriculum and learning objectives certainly would be great. And engaging community support, parent support. In the case of my work with our ESL students, not only did I engage the ESL teacher, but I also engaged members of the various different immigrant groups in our community. In your assignment description, I've included this template, which you're welcome to adjust and perhaps make more visual. I encourage you to be creative with your plan. I encourage you to be creative with your needs assessment. It doesn't need to necessarily look like a formally written paper. As I mentioned, some of our Canvas discussions are going to be workshop opportunities. So we will be workshopping your goal statements, and I want to encourage everybody to participate in helping each other make better, more robust, and more meaningful goals. I'll be engaging as well. So you notice in the first one, this one has to do with the staffing, in this case, student volunteers. And the initial goal was to develop the Library Helpers program at the beginning of the school year in order to garner the most help possible throughout the entirety of the school year. And my edit was to develop a Library Ambassadors program at the beginning of the 24 school year to offer students opportunities for authentic and creative service to their community. And so you're framing that in terms of the your interest in your personas. You are not just looking for help for the library, but you're thinking about what opportunities you might offer students to both help the library, but also develop a service mentality or capacity, and also to use their own creative skills in this opportunity. In the second one, what I did was I did some crossing out on that one. The initial one was in the spring semester of the 23 school year, the librarian will weed extensively to get rid of outdated books, and there was a little bit more. But what I wanted to do was not frame it in terms of just the library. I wanted to give it a purpose. So my suggestion was in the spring semester of 23, the librarian will assess the currency, condition, and relevance of the titles in the library shelves to assure that students and teachers can more easily view and and access our dynamic and growing collection. That is a much more positive frame in my mind. And then one of the action steps, of course, will be doing some thoughtful weeding based on review sources and use. But you're framing the goal in an aspirational way, and you're connecting it to the school needs specifically. And in the third example, did a little bit more crossing out and addition. In the initial goal was the librarian will update and genreify the middle grade section of the library. And so what I did was the librarian will update and genreify, there was a spelling thing there, the middle grade section of the library, and I added a rationale to promote student access and engagement with our collection. And that was a suggestion. So in many cases, the students continued to work on them, and we worked on them as a group. So that's what our workshopping will look like. We'll also do some workshopping, and I want you to reach out to me if you have any problems. Beyond doneness, beyond the notion of a checklist, yes, I contacted the PTA, or yes, we instituted a lesson, or yes, we put a makerspace in. I want you to examine a measure beyond doneness. I want you to think about an impact measurement. I want you to evaluate outcomes. How did it affect academic achievements and learning outcomes? There are other outcomes besides those two, but think about that. How might we assess community engagement, the level of participation in our social media effort, for instance? How might we collect feedback and reflection? For instance, exit interviews or exit tickets. So think beyond, did I finish this particular task? But in what way did my work on my goals impact the school community, the learners, the personas I've identified? These are much more powerful stories to tell. I want you to note that you're not completely alone. Beyond the workshopping that we're going to do, in each of the assignments, in this case, I'm showing you an assignment to the needs assessment and an action plan and the board presentation. What I've been doing over the years and over the semesters is collecting examples of effective work, and this could look different. So I do not want any of these things to look prescriptive. There's not one right way to do this, but I wanted you to see how other people have responded to the prompts and the assignments. And just so you know, in the board presentation, really there are only two measures. One is the aesthetics, like in what way did you create a really engaging and attractive presentation, and the other one is, in what way did you make any potential arguments that you might be making or persuade the board of your capability and aspirational service. So that's just a little bit about assessment and the possibilities for creativity. Speaking of creativity, please don't be boring. I've mentioned that a couple of times already. I want you to engage in innovation. I probably have told you that there's no box. Nobody will die if you make a mistake. And you can be innovative. You can play around a little bit. So don't be afraid to dream. Don't be ordinary. Establish an innovation culture. You're modeling this for the entire community. Look outside the library, scan the world beyond for signals, and seek opportunities that you may not seek if you were cloistered in within the four walls of your library. So how do you do that? Well, ALA has a Library of the Future website, which I believe they've been updating, and they keep up with trends. In fact, the ALA, as well as IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations, has looking forward documents that they publish every single year. Those are great to look at. I hope that my mindset poster on asking these questions, what are my whys? What if I could? Why shouldn't I? And the idea of seeking problems and cultivating a growth mindset and reflecting, it becomes a very important part of your practice. I'd like to inspire you to engage in some future thinking. This is Miguel Figueroa. He was formerly with the ALA Center for the Future of Libraries. He's a futurist, and you'll probably see his name out there.
Hi, I'm Miguel Figueroa from the American Library Association. I'm always inspired by Jane McGonigal's suggestion that we need to play with the future, that we should be positive and playful and construct futures that inspire us and give us some direction. That's kind of the fourth step that she says of a process of collecting signals, combining those signals into forecasts, and creating personal foresight, trying to make the stories relevant to us. A lot of that playfulness and that idea of combining signals and forecasts is contingent on this idea of there are many futures, not just one. I think we can look at that in two directions. For futurists, they say there are many futures, not just one, to encourage us to think beyond a baseline of thinking, to encourage us to understand that the future, until it becomes the present, has lots of different opportunities for direction and places that it can go. It can move and change as new signals emerge and prepare themselves. So we're combining those signals and forecasts not in the pursuit of a specific future, not to predict the exact future, but to build strength and capacity so that we're able to kind of become more flexible and adaptable no matter what the future turns out to be. In that process, we kind of strengthen ourselves, we build awareness, we start to understand the systems that are there, and perhaps we become inspired to pursue and actively engage ourselves around one particular future and try to make that our most preferable and desirable future and align our activities around that. Think about it a second way, though, too. Think about there are many futures, not just one, in terms of your organization and other organizations, that you're pursuing a very specific future that has to do with your organizational and environmental context, along with the global trends that are shaping all of our experiences. And it's okay that your view of the future might be slightly different from your colleagues' view of the future, might be slightly different from other colleagues across the country or even around the world. We're trying to design active future plans that are based on the unique context that all of us operate in, with a keen awareness of the global trends that are shaping all of our experiences.
I am truly looking forward to reading about the futures that you imagine and where these inquiry projects will take you. I'm hoping that they'll be reflective and inspiring and creative. Remember, there is no excuse for staying in a rut. You can lead a school forward. Welcome to week 2 of the Strategic Planning Guide. This week we're focusing on the environmental scan of your community and school. When we begin an environmental scan, we need to identify the values or assumptions that are the guiding principles of the organization. Several factors must be considered in the initial strategic planning steps that come from external and internal analysis. External factors are social, economic, cultural, demographic, and political. Internal analysis consists of factors like staff, services, systems, and resources. You'll need to identify the kind of community in which your school is located, what the population is, what is the tax base, what are the languages spoken, the religious and ethnic makeup. You'll need to understand the context of the school library. What is the community and the school in which it's situated like? What is the culture and history? Take a trip to the Historical Society if there is one, visit the grocery store or other local businesses. Try to get a pulse on what's going on in the community. Start also collecting documentation of policies, procedures, and the curricula taught. Look at the school report card. What kind of digital presence does the library have? Observe what the working relationships of the librarian and the other faculty is. Does he or she get along with the administration? Is there other staff in the library? Are there volunteers? What contributions do they make? What is the relationship of the librarian to these staff members? What is the general feeling of the students about the library? Are they hushed all the time? Is the place dynamic, energetic, collaborative? What services are available and how are they communicated? Be on the lookout for red flags. Through observation, you'll be able to identify the red flags in the program. Keep a journal every day that you're in your field experience and record observations about the kinds of lessons, collaborations, interactions with staff and students that are happening. What do you see good that's happening, and what are you picking up on that could be improved? What gaps are there in the program? Try to be a fly on the wall and make your observations and jot them down. The bullet points on this slide provide you with the things that you need to find out for your environmental scan. You should begin to collect these materials and or making the necessary observations to inform you in order to complete assignment 1, which is your needs assessment. You'll need mission statements, goals, and objectives that should be on the district's websites. Library mission statements should be in sync with district mission statements or school mission statements. Find these statements. Begin looking at courses offered as articulated in the curriculum. What are the methods of instruction? Is instruction inquiry-based? What special programs are available? This is different than special groups. Special programs would be things like service learning or character education. Those are programs that could apply to special groups as well as the general population. Programs like Gifted or English language learning or speech and hearing are examples of programs that are designed for special groups. You need to find out the methods for assessing student learning, how progress is reported, what kinds of state and local testing takes place, what kind of grades are being assigned. Are they ABC or satisfactory? Are teachers using portfolio assessments or performance assessments? How is the school addressing state and national standards? A current issue that needs to be factored in at this time are SGOs, or student growth objectives. Is the school focused on the Common Core state assessments? How are teachers evaluated? Check out if your field school has a 5-year plan, a school development plan. Try to get your hands on their accreditation report or find out if they have any self-study analysis. Get a hold of the school vision or mission statement, goals, and objectives. If they have a strategic or an action plan, collect that as part of your documentation. You can conduct formal and informal interviews, ask to observe classroom instruction, interview the teacher afterwards if you do an observation. If you have questions on structuring interviews or observing and journaling, we can talk about that in our discussions. Listed on this slide are the readings for week 2 of the Strategic Planning Guide. Congratulations, you've now finished the section for week 2. Hi students, welcome to week 3, and this week we look at the basic elements of the library program that we'll draw on for the needs assessment that will inform our action plan. I apologize for the length of this slide. Our first order of business is to look at our current situation so that we can make an assessment of the needs that will guide our action plan. The 5 components of the school library program we'll focus attention on should be familiar to you. We're going to be looking at the learning spaces, learning space or facilities. You'll need to draw a current floor plan of the library in which you're working, and after your needs assessment, to be able to recommend changes through your use of a PowerPoint slide or some kind of drawing that illustrates both the existing and a recommended new floor plan. You'll look at staff. You'll submit job descriptions for the library staff, include regular volunteers. You may find current job descriptions at your field experience school, but if these haven't been updated for a while, you'll need to make some changes and prepare job descriptions for any new positions that you recommend. You'll look at collection. You'll need to provide a selection policy for the library. You should be able to speak with your field librarian for help in gathering the documents he or she should have handy. You'll need to describe the collection in both quantitative and qualitative terms. You can use collection mapping techniques, and in week 6 we described those techniques in more detail. You'll need to describe how the collection responds to the needs of the curriculum, the students, the teachers. You'll be able to do a collection analysis for age, strengths, and weaknesses of your collection, and then look for gaps based on the curriculum and the instructional program of the school, and then the special populations and programs that exist. For budget, you'll prepare a budget for the library based on the current budget, include recommended funding increases over your 3-year plan, and include a brief justification for the recommended increases. In terms of your instructional program, look at library scheduling. Is there a book or calendar that's kept? It might be an electronic calendar like a Google Calendar. Provide usage statistics that include the number of classes taught, the major units taught, and all subject areas that come into the library. Are some areas of the curriculum not being served? What kinds of collaborations are happening? How is the collaboration taking place? What's the mode of communication? Is some of the action virtual? How do lessons get designed? And is there an integration of information and technology skills? These 5 components of the library program must be looked at to identify positive aspects and issues relating to the program. This is done through both qualitative and quantitative analysis. The goals and objectives you will set will address the weaknesses in the program, and the action plan is what you will do to implement objectives in a 3-year sequence. The final outcome is in 2 parts. 1, the action plan is a written report, and then there's the oral component that will be a brief presentation to the Board of Education highlighting the points in your plan. There is no strategic plan until the needs assessment happens, because we need to understand the current status and the areas that need improvement. The needs assessment provides us with baseline information in order for us to be able to decide what our goals would be. How will we prioritize and set time frames, all set in the framework of bringing about program improvement. In order to structure your plan, we'll examine the elements of a library program. You'll also be referencing the National Library Standards. You're going to be looking at instruction, teaching and learning. Is there a high degree of collaboration? Not coordination or cooperation, but really true collaboration or partnership. Are students engaged in inquiry and knowledge building in addition to information literacy activities? Is the instructional program integrated with subject area curriculum or curricula? Are skills learned in the context of classroom assignments? In terms of collection development or access to information, Is there a variety of reading levels and formats available through your collection? Does the collection support those parts of school curricula and state standards that are best taught through inquiry learning and resource-based learning? Is there a selection policy? Is the collection up to date? In terms of staffing and administration, is there a certified library media professional there? We're going to assume that you would not be placed in a library without one. Is there an adequate technical and clerical staff? Do the staff meet national standards? Are staff available before, after, and during school hours? Are the staff trained and retrained on a regular basis? In terms of facilities and technology, is the facility welcoming and non-threatening? I'd ask, is it enchanting? Can it sustain multiple diverse activities in terms of size and design? Is the technology adequate in terms of reliability, quantity, and currency? Is there a plan for obsolescence? In terms of budget and advocacy, is the budget adequate to support the elements of an effective library program? Are budget items connected to goals and objectives that are in the strategic plan? So you're going to be looking at qualitative measures of data collection, and qualitative measures deal with descriptive details. They're a little hard to measure. Data can be observed but not measured. You can look at things when we talk about qualitative like textures, smells, colors, appearance, beauty. When we talk about quantitative measures, we're talking with numbers. We're talking with data that can be measured. So an example of what the difference between qualitative and quantitative are or is, qualitative data, say for the freshman class. You might say that the freshman class has a friendly demeanor. You might say that as a whole they're civic-minded, that they're environmentalists, that they have positive school spirit. In terms of quantitative data, as we look at the freshman class, we can say perhaps that there are 672 students, that 394 are girls and 278 are boys, that 68% of them are on the honor roll, and 150 or so of them, or 150 are in accelerated in mathematics. So that's what quantitative would look like. This slide may shed some light on what a case study is. If you're doing a case study of your field experience location, the researcher is the research instrument in a case study through which all data passes. Or actually pass, data is plural. Without objective reflection, these data become contaminated with bias. You may, for example, think that the instructional program is pretty good because it is the only media specialist second year on the job, and there are lots of students in the library most of the time. As the objective observer, you'll be digging in deeply into the evidence, and if you listen carefully, it'll lead you to solid evidence-based conclusions as a case study. A little bit more on case studies. Your first step is choosing your case or library and your media specialist or teacher librarian. You may be guided by some questions in your own practice or experience in library or in a classroom. You may have some interest in a particular grade level or type of school. On the other hand, you might want to impose your vision of what a good media center looks like, so you do have a bias. Your second step is to establish firm research focuses by forming questions about the situation or problem to be studied and by determining a purpose for the study. Some guiding question might be, how can this library better serve the needs of its clients? Or, how can it be more effective? Or, why isn't it better and more effective? Follow the outline in your syllabus and the elements described in this guide to frame questions that will help you study the essential elements of a school library program. Those elements are its instructional program, as we said before, staffing, budget, the learning space or facility, and the collection. Your choice of data collection instruments is critical because they'll produce the evidence that leads to understanding of the case and articulating the needs of the school library. The third and fourth steps involve collecting data. Good investigators review documents looking for facts, but also read between the lines and pursue collaborative evidence elsewhere when that seems appropriate. Investigators need to be flexible in real-life situations and not feel threatened by unexpected change, misappointments, or lack of office space. Investigators must also be aware that they're going into the world of real human beings who might feel threatened or unsure of what the case study is looking like or what it will bring. In the fifth stage, the researcher analyzes and addresses the original set of research questions to see whether more data is needed. During this step, the researcher needs to remain open to new opportunities and insights. In the last step, prepare the report, being careful to protect the identity of the school unless permission is granted by the media specialist. No students' names should be used. And so as we reach the end of this section for week 3, this is these are the readings that you need to do for under Reed's needs assessment. Hi students, you're entering week 4 of the Strategic Planning Guide. This week will provide you with information about assignment 2. That's the action planning based on what you've gathered so far in your needs assessment. Your goal in assignment 2 is to set goals and objectives to address weaknesses you found in the program from the qualitative and quantitative data you collected in your needs assessment. The goals and objectives will be your action plan over a 3-year sequence. You will present your action plan as a report to the administrator of the school and to the Board of Education with an oral component that will be presented to the Board of Education. Your challenge for the presentation will be to point out the major points of your plan while keeping it short and sweet. No Board of Education meeting would give you more than a few minutes of their time to pitch your case, so this is a challenge. Your challenge is to boil down your 3-year action plan into a few words with graphs and charts and tables. You may choose to create an infographic or a digital story. The following slides will give you some ideas for your presentation. Mission statements and vision statements do 2 distinctly different jobs. You can click on the words to make some discoveries or watch a short video on the differences, and I'm hoping that will explain the difference between mission and vision. Briefly, mission is a brief, clear statement of why you exist. Your vision defines your purpose in terms of values and offers direction. Your vision statement should inspire you and your staff to achieve the mission. You'll also be looking at goals and objectives. And again, those are 2 different things. A goal is a broad definition, where an objective is much more specific and it identifies how you will meet the goal. You will find some materials that will be useful to you in planning beyond the SMART goal writing in the National School Library Standards. There is a part of our implementation plan with goals and objectives. However, these do not necessarily have the full SMART goals that we actually wrote in the actual plan. So these are parts of the goals and objective statements. Another thing that might be very useful to you is our school library evaluation checklist. While these are not necessarily fully realized goal statements, I think they'll give you an idea of the scope around which you can really consider writing your goals and objectives. So it might be a very good idea to just browse through that list. Pages 165 and 166 of the National School Library Standards book. You'll find that page 165 offers a clear infographic about what all the letters in SMART really mean. And you'll also find that on page 166, you'll see a very clear example of a SMART goal that you can use as a model as you build your own. And I want to suggest an alternative. First, I want you to either use the structure that I suggested, or you can experiment with creating your goal statements around the shared foundations of inquire, include, collaborate, curate, explore, and engage, that would be fine. But if you choose to do it the traditional way, please remember to tag the goals around the areas, say, of collection and advocacy with a shared foundation. So in parentheses, I would like to see your goal under a particular area of the library program, and then parentheses around the word inquire or include or collaborate. So I want you to use one of those two choices to incorporate the shared foundations of the National School. While we've called this a strategic plan for a while now, I also want you to think deeply about innovation. We talked about your why, we talked about innovative leadership earlier in the course. As you develop your plan, don't forget to continue thinking outside the box as if there isn't a box. Remember that. So as you develop your plan, don't be afraid to do a little dreaming. Don't be afraid to create in your library and in your school a culture of innovation. Look for inspiration outside the library. Scan the world beyond your school and look for opportunities and try to avoid the obstacles. There are many places you can go. You can go outside and look at the successful coffee shops and open workspaces, and much more conveniently, without even getting out, you can look at ALA's library future documents. Miguel Figueroa has been working on trends. You can see them expressed here and dive more deeply into any of the trends listed here when you click on the slide. Readers might begin thinking about the future creatively and productively. And here's what he responded.
So at the end of her 2016 South by Southwest EDU keynote, Jane McGonigal encouraged us to play with the future, to take on the assignment of dreaming productively and positively about the future. She had given us 4 steps. Play with the future was the 4th. The first one was to collect signals from the future. Second was to combine signals into forecasts, to start telling stories and imagine scenarios that we might encounter. And then to create personal foresight, make it really meaningful for us and the work that we do. And then to start to play with that future, start to imagine ourselves more richly combined with those signals and within those scenarios, creating positive and preferable futures for us to pursue. It's a really bold assignment to think in big ways and to articulate the most productive visions that we can, compelling visions that will motivate our communities to work with us towards positive future goals. It's also a reminder of one of the most fundamental things about futuring, that there are many futures, not just one. Until it becomes the present, there exist multiple possibilities based on how the world changes and the new signals and trends that start to take shape and move our world in new and different directions. So we're not working to predict a specific future. We're working instead to equip ourselves with the abilities, the insights to pursue multiple futures depending on where and how our world moves. It's an exercise in preparedness, not an exercise in prediction. But we can still play with that future and start to dream big and bold visions, and hopefully we can have our communities move with us towards those preferable positive futures.
So I love the idea of playing with the future, recognizing that there are multiple futures, not just one, telling our own stories about the future, and getting our communities excited about working with us about the possible futures that we can imagine. So let's keep all those things in mind as we begin to work on our plans. I'd also like you to take a look at some of the resources we've gathered on design thinking. We don't have time to do a course in design thinking. I want you to be aware of the process. And one way to get a very quick introduction is to look at the way IDEO redesigned a shopping cart, a familiar object like a familiar institution, the library. They completely rethought it, gathered some people who were willing to think deeply and think creatively, and then test and prototype and get feedback. And so take a look at that short video. And then this week, I'd like you to take a look at these readings. Remember also that our LibGuide has materials on objectives, personas, goals, of course. And also we have the design thinking playlist, which you don't need to take a deep dive into, but just be aware of some of the resources out there. And I will see you next time. This is week 5. Welcome to part 2 of our discussion of action plans. If you've been pacing yourself through this strategic planning guide and gathering important documents along the way, you should be in great shape, and congratulations for making it to week 5 of our guide. Please take a look at the examples of a needs assessment and action plans that I've posted for you on the course homepage. In your report, you might want to help define your goals and objectives through visuals. You'll probably want to do that for your oral presentation that you're going to be presenting to the Board of Education, especially because you're going to be limited in the number of words, slides, and minutes you have to present the main points of your report. This slide presents a visual of an action plan timetable with the objectives stated and when those objectives are going to be implemented over time. In this graphic, you see the vision and mission stated, and then the goals with their objectives connected to each of the 4 goals. Each objective is easily connected to the goals, both from the visual and by the numbering system that's included. Using this tree structure is another way of visualizing as well as presenting the process. You may find this template useful in capturing and recording information ideas during your strategic planning process. In fact, when I'm looking for a good form, I often go to Google Form templates or Google Doc templates to see if somebody's created an action plan that I can adapt and really customize for my own needs. Especially in usability, they represent clusters of users who behave in particular patterns and who share similar needs. They help us remember important groups of stakeholders for the purposes of defending purchases, the efforts that we put forth, and to ensure our planning focus. They really help us remember. And you'll see on the right of this slide some templates. There are so many of them out there. I'd like you to use some of those templates as you do your planning. You might even choose to use some of the stakeholders we identified with the National School Library Standards. I would probably avoid the librarians as stakeholders in this case, but you do have some choices here in terms of the others. The librarian stakeholders are Inez, Athena, Noah, and Margot, and you might identify with one of them, and your colleagues might, especially your mentor librarian might be. But in this case, you could focus on students, of course, and I want you to focus on students, but you could also focus on Tony, who is a new and possibly reluctant teacher, Leon, who's a lead learner, possibly a department chair or an administrator, a principal or assistant principal, Patty, the parent, and again, certainly the students with whom you work. Your whole collection, your whole faculty, all of your students, the whole community, it would really have very little chance of being successful. So a focus is important, and those personas will help you focus. So consider on which learners or other learning community members would you really like to focus? Which specific impacts or interventions might you make on which specific groups? And in your plan, and possibly through your board presentation to make that impact, choose at least 2 personas and try to weave them through that narrative. For this week, please continue reading in that Strategic Planning Guide, Step 7, and please also examine chapters 13, 14, and 15 of the National School Library Standards, particularly the material on SMART goals on pages 144 to 164 to 166, as well as the School Library Evaluation Checklist. I believe you will find it very useful in coming up with some solid goals that are based on the national standards. So we've reached the end of the Strategic Planning Guide. It's week 6. However, planning is a cyclical process. As we mentioned, it never really ends. You plan to improve and then you continue to improve. You may remember this chart we looked at the very beginning. After you finish the plan, after you present your plan to the board or any body that is going to examine it, you get the approval, you get evaluation, and then you decide how well you've done. You look at your metrics, the ones that you established in your SMART goals, and then you continue to improve. And so this little slide talks about the approval process. Sometimes we do a very formal plan, but very often your plan is a less formal process. I would write my plan in my annual report. Sometimes I would do an infographic or a little video or a slideshow, and it would help me just make sure I wasn't in a rut and I didn't let my program go stale. It would help me ensure understanding needs and setting goals made me a better professional, a real practitioner who I could be proud of. And so I just wanted to make sure that you understood that this isn't a crazy idea, that many people do this. You'll see examples of action plans all over the web. And I'd also like you to take a look at some of the annual reports and regular reports that are posted in a variety of different formats by school librarians and other librarians around the world. I think you'll be inspired. I think it'll help push you forward. And I hope that what you create for this project doesn't just get filed, that it actually inspires action. It's an action plan. So whether or not your field experience mentor or librarian uses it, or you are absolutely able to use it in practice, I hope that it inspires some positive change. I want you also to remember that there are materials in the National School Library Standards that will support the development of a growth plan and actually, perhaps in a better way, offer you a rationale for why you should engage in planning. I wish you luck with your plans and with your presentations and your future continual growth.